Hello there, it's Paul here and welcome everyone. Just recently I've been making some lidded boxes. This is actually my third one. The first one started at a very basic shape, the second one a bit more elaborate, and the third one I've gone for a lot more elaborate shape now with coves and beads all over it. The reason for these is to basically hold one of these 120ml bottles. So it all just goes in there nicely, and I'll explain what that's for later on. Now all of the boxes I've actually been colouring as well. The inside stays a natural colour like that, just with sanding sealer, wood wax 22. All of them have been sanded back to about 400 or 600 grit as well. But the outsides are all being coloured and then finished off with wax. If you've ever done any colouring on wood, you will know that colour doesn't cover up any of your mistakes. If you've got tear out on there, tool marks, the moment you put colour on, it will highlight it. So it's essential that you spend time sanding this back as best as you can. And I've done it as best I can because of the coves, the little edges. It's so much harder to sand it. So I suspect when I do put colour on, it's going to start highlighting where I've been. What I've done with this has been sanded all the way up to 400 on the outside here, and it's now ready for me to start applying my colour. What I'm going to do, I believe this wood is ash, and what I'm going to do a mixture of black and blue, which is the colour on that lid there. The way I've been doing these is that I will give the whole thing an entire coat of black first of all to cover the whole lot. The idea is I want it to absorb into the grain. I will then sand it right the way back so that it's just left with all these grain marks with the black. Then I'll apply a really good coating of blue. Now these are water-based colours, which I've got a video before these where I bought them and where I did some tests, so go back and look at that. There'll probably be a link at the end of the video or down below in the description. And because they're water based, they mix as well. What I want to do then is mainly have this as a black piece when it finishes, but with bits of blue randomly coming out in different areas. The airbrush I think I've done a review on this one. What I've found on this for best results is to have the airbrush on a fairly low pressure. So I've running this at about 1 bar, and you don't need to have the lathe spinning up. I mean, you can do if you want to. If you've got a lathe where the minimum speed is 500 RPM, then certainly don't do that because it will just spray off everywhere. So I'll just show this without the lathe spinning, just manually turning it. And all I want to do is just get this covered in black like that to start with. So I'm just going to leave that probably about 5-10 minutes now just to dry off, and then I will get that sanded back so you can see at the moment, obviously, I mean, where it's drying more on here, that's what it's going to look like when it's all fully dry. Now I've sanded this back through the grits, and what's actually happened here, the black hasn't actually gone into the grain. What's happened here is, because of all the shaping I've got on here, whenever you make the wood thinner, you expose end grain, which is where all this is built up, and you've obviously got some of the hard to reach places where you just really cannot sand very much, right up against the edges. But that's not a problem, and of course, obviously, because the end here is end grain, that's stayed a lot darker as well. Not sure whether this is actually ash. I mean, it could be beech, but certainly leave a comment below if you think what you think on the wood. Either way, it's a piece of wood I just picked up from the wood mill, which was being sold really as firewood. So the next thing I'm going to do now is going to cover this with blue, and as I said before, because these are water based, they're going to mix colours. So where it hits the black, it will stay black, and when I go over again with some black afterwards to make this more darker in places, it will just initially become darker blue before it then becomes the black. So rather than having dark grain, you can probably see that what this is doing, it's actually keeping some of the grain really white. So I'll just build this all up. I might let this dry and then give a second coat to try and really build up the blue colour on it. The good thing about putting the black on as well to start with is what it also did is it raised all the grain, because these are water based. So resanding it back again, each time you put more liquid on like this way with the colour, it doesn't raise the grain so much. So that is coming up quite nicely now. And you can certainly see where the darker bits are from the black underneath. This has now had actually an extra couple of coats of the blue, and what I did when it dried first time, knocked it back again with a 400, just gently gave it a second coat, let that dry off, and just knocked it back with one of these cloths, which is supposed to be a bit equivalent, about 1,000 grit-ish. Giving it another coat and it's a lot smoother now. Going back to the black now, and I mean, I don't know how well it shows on the camera, there are still signs of black through there, but I now want to darken this up a lot more so that it's predominantly more of a darker black colour with some of the blue popping out. So the idea is, first of all, it's just, this is where you want to do it without the lathe spinning. So I'm going for that black base to start with. And then I'm just going to do more rougher bits, just random. And if I want to darken up the blue a bit, I can go lightly over with the black because it will react with it. So I'm just going to let that dry off a bit and then just top it up as I see where I want to. Because I've got these patches of blue, especially sort of like the eye where the grain is in the wood coming out, and just other random patches, and then the black just sort of like filling in most of it now. The black has now dried up. It's still reasonably smooth, it's not too bad. Now I've noticed on my screen here that it looks a lot bluer than what it actually is. There is an awful lot of black in here, so it's more black than blue, and which is what I was after. Now normally I would apply sanding sealer by cloth here, but because I've got these sort of highlights of blue, I want to actually keep those as bold as they are now. So I'm going to go for the spray sanding sealer this time. I'm almost out, so hopefully I've got enough for this. And I'm just for ease going to put the lathe on slow speed. Now I'm just going to let that dry. I may knock it back a bit with the cloth again, but I should probably give that a second coat of sanding sealer as well. This has had a couple of coats of wood wax 22 and a coat of microcrystalline wax there, which has just been left for about 10 minutes. Ideally it wants up to about 20, so I'm just going to buff this off now. And that's the finished item. So that is what I was after. It's a really dark colour, just with these blue highlights in it. So I'm going to get that parted off and then I'll have a final talk. So it's following day. Today I've just come out, parted off, finished off the bottom. Now, quick tip on here, if you do any spindle work like this, the bit a lot I've got left in the chuck here. It's probably about a finger width, so it's about a centimetre, 10mm, maybe slightly longer. Don't throw it out. You can face it off and then use it as a waste block, especially if you say like want to fix something on with say like hot glue or something like that. Absolutely ideal. Alternatively, and especially even if it's smaller, what you can actually do, just scoop it out like I've done with that one, and I've just flattened off the bottom as well, just on the bench sander, and that now acts as a brilliant little glue pot. So the finished item, this is it. And I've got to say, I mean, I will show some pictures on this anyway, because I am so pleased on the colours of this. I know with the camera, when I was looking at the screen yesterday, because the bright lights have got on there, was showing this as being sort of very blue dominant, and in this light, and even if you go outside in ordinary daylight, it's actually quite dark, and there are just sort of speckles of blue in there, which is what I was really after. That I really like. Now I've brought out my other ones. This is the very first one I did, which is a very straightforward shape. Haven't really done a lot at the bottom, just sanded off a bit, not put any finish or anything on it, but the inside is just left as natural wood with wood wax 22, and that was really sort of my first attempt with the colouring, trying to get the red in there with the black, and I just think that I should have put a lot more black on there. And with this one, and I'll show you the next one that I did, which was this one, so it's a different shape. You can see how the shape's developing on here. Again with the colouring, I like the colouring a lot more on here, it's just more speckled natural. But with these first two, what I actually did as well is when I put the black on, I think I didn't leave it long enough for the black to dry. In this particular case, it should have been yellow and purple. That's actually a purple on there. And I applied the sanding sealer by hand, and because it was sort of like the last colour on there, and it would probably only have been on there a matter of minutes before I went over the sanding sealer, it probably hadn't dried enough, so therefore it took a lot of it away, because that should have really come out fairly dark, more like that, so that there was less yellow showing, which was what I was really after. But having said that, I mean, often not you make these little errors, I mean, from what you're trying to do, and you come out with something just as good, and sometimes if not better. So I'm really pleased with that one. I do like the shape difference, I think, compared to that one, but I wanted to make a bit more use of the wood and sort of do something a little bit different with them, rather than have them all that same basic shape. And when I come to the third one, I just thought, right, how can I go about putting more beads, coves in the whole thing to try and hopefully make it look fairly elegant, but keep the size down. So what are these actually for? As you've seen, I was measuring them for these 120ml bottles. I smoked for probably over 30 years, and I gave up smoking 2 years ago, and like most smokers, when they give up, went over to the vape. If you're a vapor, normally when you buy your bottles, they're in these little 10ml bottles. So I've gone over to making my own, and the good thing about it is they come out a lot cheaper. Now the other thing on these as well is this one I've probably made a little bit looser in there. Still fits there nicely, but as you can see, you can probably hear it shakes a bit. Whereas these others two, especially the first one, it's such a nice fit in there. There's probably less than a millimetre gap going down there, so because of that, it traps the air in there. The air can't get out very quick, so it also acts as a nice cushion for putting the bottle in and out. Now, hopefully this has given you a few ideas, certainly not about taking up vaping, but certainly about the colouring processes, certainly what I use, and maybe a few things to look out for. Maybe you've already done sort of things like this the way I've done it, found it's the best way. Maybe you haven't, and you've seen me do something different, and you've thought, right, well, I'll give that a go, down to your personal preference. And it's just the same with the colours that I've done on these and the shapes. Some of you, I'm sure, will love them, maybe more than others. Some of you will hate them. That's what's called being human. Thanks a lot for watching.